The first shot hit before the alarm did. Across the cold black glass of Meridian Station, a column of Vaketh plasma burst through the outer ring like a needle shoved through silk. Lights died in corridors that had been full of children eating breakfast. Bulkheads screamed. Cryogenic bays, the ones holding 40,000 sleeping colonists headed for Proxima, lost pressure in a single sucking instant. There was no evacuation order. There was no warning. There was only a flash on long-range sensors, a tremor underfoot, and then Admiral Yuki Tanaka, commander of the 3rd Terran Expeditionary Fleet, watching the signature of every human soul on Meridian go dark. 400,000 people, gone between one breath and the next. Tanaka stood in the bridge of the carrier Resolute and did not move. Her hands remained flat on the rail. Her jaw was set. Around her, officers waited for the order that would let them grieve later. They knew her well enough now. They knew what came after her silence. They knew the silence itself was an order. Outside the viewport, the stars looked the same as they always had. And that was the cruelest part. Because somewhere out there, in those same unblinking constellations, the Vaketh Imperium was already composing its apology. The Imperium always apologized. The Imperium had apologized for 6 different human border stations in the last decade. Every apology arrived punctually, beautifully engraved, and absolutely meaningless. The arrogance of that species was not the loud kind. It was the quiet kind. The kind that sits in a chair across from you, folds 4 arms across its chest, and explains in perfect Terran that what it has just done is regrettably biological. The Vaketh High Cantor, a being shaped like a folded wing of black leather, had been recorded saying it on the diplomatic channel just 2 minutes before the strike. Humans are a juvenile species, it had told the conclave of 7 systems, the so-called galactic governing body that humanity had begged to join for 80 years. A juvenile species cannot be allowed to spread beyond its system without supervision. Confinement is mercy. The conclave had not protested. The conclave, as usual, was busy protecting its own reflection in polished marble. 6 of the 7 member species signed within the hour a formal memorandum of apology addressed to the Vaketh Imperium. The 7th abstained, which was as close to courage as galactic law ever came. And on Earth, in the long white halls of the Terran Senate, the message arrived wrapped in legal language and old grief. Sectors were sealed, orbital ports locked down. Families crowded around flickering screens, watching the same grainy footage of a ring of debris where Meridian used to be, while senators argued about whether the response should be diplomatic, juridical, or simply another carefully worded letter. Humanity had been responding to provocations with carefully worded letters for 2 centuries. We had become, in the eyes of the galaxy, a species of stenographers. We wrote things down. We signed things. We waited for others to keep their signatures, and when they did not, we wrote things down again. Not this time. Tanaka broke her silence with 2 words: fleet dark. Across every Terran ship within 9 light-years, running lights dimmed. Reactors dropped into low output. Compressed plasma vented in controlled plumes designed to look like collapsing atmospheres. On every sensor the Vaketh saw, on every conclave probe that quietly prowled human space, the entire human navy simply vanished. To a panicked enemy watching its screens, 300 warships became 0 in the space of a breath. The Vaketh High Command called it a probable malfunction. The conclave called it an encouraging sign of compliance. They were both wrong, and both about to die for being wrong. The conclave convened an emergency session on the 3rd day after Meridian, in a chamber carved from a single asteroid, lit by gas that burned the color of old bone. The Vaketh Cantor spoke first, dead calm. wings folded the way a predator folds itself when it knows it is in no danger. It explained, for the record, that the destruction of Meridian had been a localized sanitation measure undertaken after the regrettable discovery of unauthorized human infrastructure in a sector previously reserved for imperial tithing routes. It reminded the chamber that humanity had no fleet worth the name, no orbital industry worthy of attention, and no doctrine anyone in this chamber needed to read twice. It recommended that the conclave ratify the measure, dissolve the petition of Earth for full membership, and reclassify the Sol system as a protected juvenile reserve. A delegate from the Vesh collective rose to speak, a translucent being that rippled when it was frightened. It said the word outraged 3 times in one sentence. A delegate from the Core Syndicate said nothing at all, but filed a long technical objection for the record, the way merchants did when they expected to be on the winning side of the next trade negotiation. The human ambassador, a quiet woman named Chima Okafor, was not permitted to speak until the cantor had finished. Even then, she was given 2 minutes. 2 minutes to speak for 400,000 dead. She spoke for 90 seconds. She did not beg. She did not threaten. She said only that the people of Earth had heard the decision, that they accepted the chamber's authority, and that they trusted the conclave to render a just verdict in due course. She thanked the chair. She sat down. She folded her hands. She did not raise her voice once. The chamber approved the ratification 47 minutes later. On Earth, the Senate received the ratification at 0314 local time, 17 years to the hour after the first human colony ship had ever crossed the heliopause. The vote was unanimous among the 6 supporting species. The 7th abstained again. The human ambassador's 2 minutes of restraint were archived in a file no one ever opened again. But somewhere beyond the orbit of Neptune, in a hangar carved into a rock not 3 kilometers long, an old man with white hair and hands that shook only when he was pretending that they did, watched a single amber light blink green on a console older than his grandson. He turned a key he had promised himself he would never turn. He spoke into a dead channel, a channel that no probe had pinged in 70 years, a frequency that even the conclave's most paranoid cartographers had filed away as empty static. He said one word: Resolute. On the bridge of the carrier Resolute, 14 light-years away, Admiral Tanaka's hand closed around a rail her crew had polished every day for a decade without knowing why. "Sentinel Protocol," she said. "Acknowledge." And the dark, which had been to every enemy eye an absence, began to move. They had called it the Sentinel Protocol because in the early centuries of human expansion, when we were still small and frightened and very loud about being small and frightened, our strategists understood one thing the rest of the galaxy mistook for superstition. The galaxy did not respect smallness. It devoured smallness. Every petition we filed, every treaty we signed, every apology we accepted from beings who had just killed our children, was read in the long, quiet halls of imperial chancelleries not as evidence of virtue, but as evidence of weakness. The conclave did not protect us because it loved us. It delayed its own betrayal of us because it had not yet found the most profitable moment to betray us. Every species on that council was waiting. The Vaketh had simply been the first to stop pretending it was waiting. Sentinel Protocol was the answer. For 240 years, while human diplomats smiled and sighed and signed and apologized, human shipyards beneath the ice of Europa, beneath the dust of the belt, beneath the shadowed craters of Luna's far side, had been quietly assembling something the conclave believed impossible. A fleet designed not to explore, not to colonize, not to petition, but to arrive. The protocols had been written during the long quiet, a doctrine of absolute concealment. No engine signature above 5% idle. Warships nested inside hollowed asteroids disguised as mines, as derelicts, as nothing. Crews trained in silence so deep that on drill, the entire Third Fleet would hold its breath for 7 minutes at a time, waiting for a crate in the next room to stop humming. Children born in those hollow rocks grew up watching stars through narrow slits and were told solemnly that their sleeping was a form of patriotism. They grew up hating the conclave, with a patient, well-mannered hatred that never once in 2 centuries leaked into a sensor log. There were 10,400 of them. They had names like Resolute, Indomitable, Saturn's Fury, Long Memory. And then there were the others, the ones whose names the conclave had never heard, because the conclave, in its pride, had never bothered to learn them. They sat inside rocks, inside comets, inside the trailing Lagrange points of gas giants, sleeping in perfect formation, waiting for the amber light. Entire flotillas, each one capable of sterilizing a small star system. Each one crewed by men and women who had been born knowing exactly what they were for. The Vaketh Imperium believed in its vast and self-adoring archives that humanity possessed 300 combat vessels. The conclave believed that figure was a generous rounding up. The truth, contained in a vault beneath the Drake Plateau on Earth, was a number no one had ever been permitted to say in a room with windows. That number had been inked onto a sealed parchment every generation, and the parchment had been read aloud exactly once. Now it was read aloud again. Admiral Tanaka closed her eyes when she heard it. Then she opened them, and what her bridge crew saw in them was not grief. It was something older. It was the kind of look that soldiers who have been waiting their whole lives for permission finally wear when that permission arrives. She spoke into a channel the size of a continent, and 10,400 warships heard her at once. Give them back our dead. They came up out of the dark in a single coordinated surge, a bloom of light across stars that had not seen human activity in living memory. Reactor signatures lit up simultaneously across 9 sectors. Compressed plasma vented in unison, igniting in the thin ion winds of deep space into blue-white fire. The resonant signature of 10,000 capital ships waking at once hit Vaketh's long-range arrays with such force that 3 listening stations suffered overload burns and had to be rushed to dry dock. On the main bridge of the Vaketh flagship, Imperius, the Cantor watched the surge unfold on a tactical display updated in real time, and what it saw was not a fleet. What it saw was the rest of a war. The Cantor, for the first time in its long, vicious life, made a sound. It was not a word. It was the noise a being makes when it has to inform its lungs that they can no longer do their job. The conclave's emergency channel lit up within seconds. Within minutes, every one of the 7 member species had a delegation screaming down a separate line. The Vesh Collective's envoy, the translucent being, was already weeping before its translator flickered on. The Core Syndicate's representative, the same one who had filed the technical objection days earlier, was already recalculating profit margins with shaking hands. The human ambassador, Chima Okafor, was asked urgently by 3 separate species at the same time whether Earth would accept a phone call. She let the channel ring 4 times before picking it up. When she spoke, her voice was the same voice it had been in the chamber, calm, precise, and stripped of any trace of begging. She said merely that the Third Terran Expeditionary Fleet had begun a long-planned operational review and that there was no cause for alarm. She thanked the chair. She set the phone down. She did not raise her voice once. The Vaketh Imperium, for its part, was already dying. The first engagement lasted 11 minutes. It lasted 11 minutes because Admiral Tanaka had forbidden her gunnery officers from firing before the enemy had finished forming up. She wanted them together. She wanted them to feel what 400,000 humans had felt in the last second before the lights went out. She wanted them to understand, in the time it took a plasma bolt to cross a flagship's spine, exactly what they had been so eager to call a sanitation measure. The Vaketh lost 62 capital ships before its high command issued the order to retreat. When the order came, no one obeyed, because the order was issued to ships that no longer existed. The Cantor tried to broadcast a surrender on the Imperial emergency band. Tanaka did not jam it. She let it go out. She wanted the rest of the galaxy to hear it. She wanted them to hear the Cantor, that folded-wing, marble-voiced architect of Meridian, explained in a tone of genuine incomprehension that the Vaketh Imperium had not realized humanity possessed strategic depth. That somehow, despite 2 centuries of petitions, apologies, and signed promises of restraint, the human species had accumulated 10,000 warships and the will to use them in a single coordinated release. The Cantor's voice cracked on the word depth, and the crack did not get edited out of the recording, because Admiral Tanaka ensured it did not. The second engagement lasted 9 minutes, and it was not fought near human space. It was fought at the gates of the conclave itself. 6 of the 7 member species surrendered before the first shot was fired. The 7th, the Vesh Collective, surrendered 4 minutes after the first shot, because the Vesh had the decency at the end to acknowledge that they had been wrong, and they had the wisdom to do it quickly. The conclave convened its chamber one final time in the same asteroid beneath the same gas lamps that burned the color of old bone. Every seat was filled. Even the Vesh filled its seat in person for the first time in centuries. The Cantor of the Vaketh was not present, because the Cantor was in the cargo bay of the carrier Resolute, sitting under guard, listening to a recording of Meridian's last 4 seconds on a loop. A punishment that Captain Tanaka had endorsed without enthusiasm, and the crew had endorsed with applause. Earth, when its ambassador finally rose to speak, asked for only one thing. She asked the conclave to rename Meridian Station. She asked that the designation be changed in every public registry, every ship's log, every classroom, on every member world, from what it had been, a number, a filing code, an inconvenient line item in an apology, into what it had always been, a human home with a human name, full of human children who had been eating breakfast. The chamber voted in silence. Then the ambassador asked, almost as an afterthought, that every species present file a public apology. Not to Earth, not to the Terran Senate, not to flag officers in naval uniform, but to the 400,000 dead by name. Every one read aloud in the chamber in their native languages, translated for the record and broadcast on every frequency the conclave could reach. The chamber rose. The chamber sat. The chamber began painfully, reluctantly, one by one, to read. It took 9 hours. When the last name was read, the chamber was empty. Translators had overheated. Pages had been shredded. 3 delegates had resigned in the middle of the recitation. The human ambassador sat alone at the human desk, hands folded, eyes closed, listening to the silence that follows the last dead being remembered by name. And high above, in the dark between stars, 10,400 warships held formation in perfect, terrible silence. Their running lights dimmed again, their crews waiting, patient as always, in case the galaxy ever forgot what it had learned. It did not forget. Not this time.